Welcome back! This is the Daily Dean in a car once again. This one's going to be an hour long, I hope. And basically, as the title says, teen angst. If you're not a teenager or you're an adult, what's up? If you are, welcome back. But regardless, I'll just start off with this kind of idea of toxic positivity. So when you look online, you'll often see things like, you'll look back and wonder why you ever worried at all. Or, hang in there, everything will be okay. But there's this kind of, there's no guarantee that everything in your life is going to be okay. And, I'll lead into that more positively. But, on the surface, looking out into the world, and maybe even looking out into your own personal world, things don't look very well. And things don't look like they'll be very well. Because things like climate change, wealth inequality, homelessness, debt, education, paying for housing, everything else. How are we supposed to afford that in a generation where the minimum wage can't afford you living in any county in the United States? Or in a time when our government is too busy with identity politics to actually help the people in our country? So, basically, also, there's your personal issues, where it feels like I probably also should have put a trigger warning in the beginning of this video. With trigger warning, we're talking about suicide and stuff, and violence, and I guess homelessness. But it may feel like in your own personal world that the obstacles in your life are insurmountable, and the only way out is suicide. And, if this video gets age restricted, that's kind of ironic, considering I am a teenager myself. And if anybody sees this and is wondering if I'm suicidal, you have nothing to worry about. I'm just recognizing an issue about, how our world is. So, when you're young and you have your whole life ahead of you, it can seem like problems surrounding your grades and your future are the biggest things in our lives. And that is, in many scenarios, true. If you see that, if your goals are to get to college, to, acquire a degree, to get some kind of job, then it's likely you're going to feel depressed and suicidal if you can't attain those goals, because then what else is there for you in this life? So, I don't think we should suicide shame people for having different reasons for being suicidal. Somebody can be abused and feel suicidal. Somebody can, have bad grades and feel suicidal. Those are both, they're both along the same coin. People will see that their problems can't be solved, so why have problems if you're dead? Boom. Alright? But, related to that is this idea that, somebody may not be suicidal per se. They may not try to, take their lives, but they wouldn't mind if they were dead. They wouldn't mind if they weren't born at all. And that is also fair in terms of, valid reasons to be suicidal. Because if you weren't born at all, then you wouldn't have had to worry about these problems or worry about existing and worry about the fact that not everything is guaranteed to be okay. But now that I'm done being angsty about suicide and problems, there's another flip side to that. You don't have any guarantee that everything will be okay, but you don't have any guarantee that things will be worse. There's this phenomenon in psychology and in our brains where we overestimate the value and impact of negative things in our life and when weighing decisions. So, say that you're feeling suicidal and you feel like you have nothing left to live for. In that case, your brain will overvalue and overestimate the amount of negative things in your life over the positive things in your life. And this is just an objective, scientific, studied phenomenon. Your brain, if it sees that you are risking something more in terms of negative outcomes, is going to take that into consideration more than positive outcomes. So, say you're worried about debt. Somebody on Robinhood committed suicide because they thought they owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. If you're worried about the negative outcome of that debt over the positive outcome of, everything else in your life, then you are going to overvalue that arbitrarily, because your brain just sees negative things more importantly than it sees positive things. So, about debt, there's more to that than just, Robin Hood. Just that student debt is probably the most relevant in our lives as teenagers who are probably going into, post-secondary, post-high school education. Debt is, I think, more than just a personal failing of somebody's character, right? Somebody who is in debt probably because they had to take out a loan in order to pay their education, student debt specifically. But that doesn't mean that it's because they didn't work hard enough. It's because tuition and prices of an education are becoming insurmountably high for people in lower middle class families and below to afford. Now, this is out of proportion with minimum wage. I believe it was something like you barely had to work, a full day at minimum wage in order to pay for your tuition in, the 70s. Now you have to work in excess of 14 hours to pay at minimum wage for your education. But, and so that indicates that the cost of education is outpacing the growth at which, we are being paid and the productivity we are producing for capitalism. But when you look at that and you feel as a teenager there's no other choice, let me remind you that there are things in your control. Maybe not necessarily getting an education and working super duper hard, but in more personal problems, you have things that you can control, such as how you respond to those problems. You can't control the people around you. You can't control your family, parents, brothers, teachers, friends, or whatever. But you can control what you do about it. You don't have to cut off everyone who you feel makes you upset, because sometimes you may look back and think that was a bit harsh or brash and I should have thought more about that. But you can try to let things roll off your back. That sounds kind of like, oh yeah, if you're depressed, just stop feeling depressed. But really, are those problems surrounding you because of your friends as, insurmountable as you think? And if they are, then you still have other things you can do to enjoy life beyond those problems. Your friends may, bully you, for example, and you may feel like, well, these aren't very good friends. In that case, you can cut them off, but there's still things you can do beyond your friends to enjoy life. You can still enjoy video games, your hobbies, reading, writing, whatever you enjoy per se, and still find that there are facets in your life you can enjoy beyond the problems that are currently affecting you. So, regarding things that you can't control, if you get into an accident and you see, say, you were disabled, you're now a total vegetable. In this case, some people think that medically assisted suicide is the way to go, because many people, to their wishes, would not like to live their lives, half conscious, unable to move, bedridden, hospitalized for the rest of their life. And that is a fair stance to take as well. And in those cases, those people may not find things to enjoy in their life if they're unable to be independent. And I think that actually brings up a point I didn't think, because now I've been kind of like going off of what I had written down here. But if you're if you're dependent on other people, it may feel like you're being coddled, sort of restricted. You're not able to pursue things that you may otherwise want to, and therefore you may not have the same things you want to enjoy in life. So why not commit suicide at that point, right? And, I'm speaking from the perspective of that person, not that I'm actually promoting that, but you can probably still find things to enjoy you can probably still see ways or look for ways to be more independent, look for ways or alternatives to, living a life that's happy and joyful. But suicide is really just it's a gray line, actually, a really gray area. Because if you're impoverished and you're alone and you don't have the wealth or, a home or friends to surround yourselves and enjoy life with, what would be the point of living at that point? You have nothing to enjoy. It's probably pretty hard to dig yourself out of homelessness, especially when our government doesn't, homeless people are the most disenfranchised group of people probably in, U.S. society, because without a home, you can't acquire a job. Without a home or without, a job, you aren't able to pursue the things you enjoy or even get a higher education. So homelessness is really a loophole, and it only becomes a negative feedback loop. And it only becomes harder when you're a part of other marginalized groups, such as, being black or being Asian or whatever. So at that point, our government should step in, should do things to help the people who are disenfranchised and casted off by society because they don't have jobs and because they don't contribute to our economy and because they don't do all these other things that we consider marks of a successful adult. But we don't. I read somewhere that the amount of vacant houses outnumber the homeless. So I guess imagine that. We have the resources, we have the capabilities of helping people, but we don't. Because if you help the homeless, then you're not helping the rich. Because politicians, I'm going to be sounding like a conspiracy theorist if you don't, politicians listen to lobbyists and people who line their pockets more so than they listen to the general public. I'll put a link to this in the description below. There was this study that saw that the difference between 100,000 people's votes and 1 million people's votes is negligible in comparison to, one corporation lobbying versus 100 corporations lobbying. Or I guess 10 corporations lobbying versus 100 corporations lobbying. Even though geometrically they are, proportionally the same distance away, they are not more effective in terms of political power and voting. So in that way, our government does not listen to the people as much as it listens to entities, groups of corporations that have wealth and power. So it's kind of hopeless to think that you can't effectively change things in our government purely through electoralism, electing people or public officials, when studies show that your vote doesn't necessarily matter as much. I mean, you can change things directly through propositions and whatnot, but in order to make bountiful change and have representatives in our government do things, you have to break the bottom line of corporations to make them listen. Because really, in the end, if you wanted to incite change, you don't incite change in politicians as much as you incite change in corporations. Which is hard when you can't hold corporations accountable for their actions legally, since corporations are, again, responsible for tax cuts, looser regulations, the free market in the United States, or at least the perpetuation of the free market in the United States. Because if a corporation was regulated by a government, I swear to God, many people would try protecting the corporations, saying, big gov, or big Fed, or whatever the, slang is for that. Big Fed is overstepping their boundaries. The nanny government is the word. But really, we just want to live. Is that too much hard? Is that too hard to ask for, man? Hey, I would like to not be homeless. I would like to have a home. I would like to have a job that pays for my bills and the bills that I'm paying to the corporations that make it harder to pay my bills because they're lobbying. It's really, it's just a feedback loop. If you're giving your money to the corporations, like ExxonMobil and PG&E, and they lobby to make it easier to make a profit and therefore have more power in government because they can lobby for more profit, then it feels like a catch-22, you know? Try voting for politicians. Whoops, you accidentally just put in people who listen to corporations. You try stopping, you try protest, you try not, paying PG&E, but then whoops, you don't have a home, or you don't have power, and boom, you're disenfranchised. So, things seem kind of hopeless under capitalism. But that doesn't mean you have to be hopeless, per se. There's still ways to revolutionize or go through a capitalist revolution to, I'm gonna sound like an anarchist, to overthrow capitalism. Definitely not immediately. I'm not an anarchist, but, it would be cool if corporations could stop influencing our government to pay for and lobby for tax cuts for the rich and whatnot. Because there's this great research paper, again, I also saw. If you look at the wealth, there's this kind of argument, I think I've mentioned this in the past free flow conversation, that, people like to argue, or some people like to argue that, oh, the wealthy aren't actually that wealthy, When you hear that Jeff Bezos' net worth is actually $500 billion, it's not really that high, because net worth isn't actually in liquid assets, so he doesn't have access to all of that at once. Which, I guess, fair example, but that is the one talking point many people have, the only talking point that many people have. Because when you explain that because they have that net worth, they can take out loans of money and they can immediately pay back because of their capital, then, their argument falls apart. Yes, Jeff Bezos is that rich because he can take out a $500 million yacht and pay it back like that because of his assets. People are that rich, and we should tax them. But because they take out loans instead of paying for things, and because their wealth comes from their capital growing, not because of their income, it's not that okay. When I say that their wealth is growing not because of their income but because of their capital, income tax is where, people like to, or is where a lot of people like to say, oh, increase the tax on the wealthy. But if you increase the income tax, you're not actually taxing the rich. Because look at Jeff Bezos. His income may only be $100,000, because that's what it says on paper and how much he pays himself. But when you actually look at what he's making in terms of his Amazon stocks and bonuses there, and how much he owns of Amazon and other things, then his wealth grows exponentially high, right? But we're not taxing that, which is why it's important to tax that over their income. Because their income on paper can be super duper dumb. They can have tax write-offs that make it look like, oh yeah, see, I totally donated 500 million or 500,000 to a charity, therefore that actually counters my income tax, even though that donation is only a fraction of their actual wealth. So when I absolutely hate when people say that, the wealthy are distributing their wealth through philanthropy. Look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or Jeff Bezos donating their dollars to people in need. Philanthropy is only the wealthy trying to keep, when I say wealthy, I also don't mean people who have like $1 million in net worth. When I'm talking about wealthy, I mean people who have 100 times that, have 1,000 times that, have over billion dollars in net worth. Because at that point, you're exploiting people, exploiting workers at Amazon, exploiting workers across, countries. So, if you live in a well-off family, it's very likely that you're not actually the people I'm talking about. Sure, you should be taxed equally as well, but really, the people who have the most control aren't regular family people like, you and I. It's people who are benefiting from mines and from Amazon workers having to pee in bottles and other junk. So, where I was going with that before, philanthropy is only a minor nuisance, a minor tax that the wealthy pay in order to keep their wealth. Because if we tried, wealthy people worth billions of dollars don't need that much money in order to live a well-off life. But if we take that, nanny government, we're gonna fucking personal freedoms. Personal freedoms to who? Right? Personal freedoms of wealthy people? I don't get why people want to defend people like Jeff Bezos through the argument of philanthropy. If we reallocated and taxed their wealth from Amazon, from stocks, from companies like Facebook, then we wouldn't have to worry about their philanthropy. We could just do it ourselves. But we don't. Because again, corporations pay our government not to do that. So, that sucks. And that leads back into the true tax of wealthy people. Because again, the difference between their wealth, growing because of their assets and their capital, the things that they own, is different from the income that their actual income. Because if you looked at how much wealth they accumulated, that rich people, not, regular rich people, but rich people, like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, if you look at how much wealth they accumulated in the past pandemic, but then you see how much they paid in taxes, you can see that the percentage is at least 0.5%. And it is like at most 5 or maybe 10, something like that. I'll put the link to that article in the description below as well. But the true tax rate of the rich is astronomically low. When a third of your paycheck has to go to the government, or maybe a third is an exaggeration, but when you lose hundreds of dollars in comparison to your $1,000 paycheck, or so on and so forth, where's the justice? Why is a person paying more proportionally in taxes who has to work just as, if not harder, than somebody like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg? Where's the justice in making sure wealth is being distributed equally? But no, they work just as hard trying to get their wealth. Yeah, maybe they work just as hard. Maybe for the first year or so of them trying to start up their business or their capitalist ploy. But in terms of the rest of their wealth, which they don't have to work as hard for, because literally just lying around sleeping, their wealth accumulates. They don't work as hard. Like, man, I wish we were still talking about angst, but I don't have anything more I want to talk about angst, because hate capitalism, but I'm getting tired of talking about it. So if you relate to what I'm saying, and you feel what I'm feeling, what I'm talking about, just look up reading. And if you disagree with me, sure, I guess, tell me about it. I guess I should have put a disclaimer at the beginning of this video saying that, the things that I'm saying may not be the opinion I hold in the future. Because who knows? Maybe I become a super duper capitalist and I get to hoard my wealth and don't have to listen to what poor people have to say, like myself. Poor people relative to their wealth, because obviously I don't think I'm poor, but who knows? In perspective to Elon Musk, I may be homeless. So, I was going to say something before that. People might argue that, they can ascend out of their position, their socioeconomic position, to be worth billions of dollars just by working hard enough. But in order to get there, you have to exploit people and workers. Or you have to inherit your wealth, which, if you haven't already, you would be aware of. Obviously, there's cases where somebody becomes a millionaire, but very rarely where someone becomes a billionaire through hard work alone. So, if anybody watching this actually does have wealth, but, everything I'm saying is kind of like offensive to them because, it may seem like I'm attacking them, my apologies. Once again, I'm not referring to people who have mansions. I'm referring to people who piss on the working class. People who, like Jeff Bezos, don't care about what their workers are making, or actively try to stop unions, or don't care about the quality of life of their employees. And it's very likely you're not one of those people, or you're not in one of those families. But if you are, then I do hate your family, because you are hurting people, and that is worthy of hate. But it's very unlikely that you're not. So, sorry if it feels like I'm attacking you because your family is well off. Because, if nobody is proud of being broke in comparison to well-off people. If I was given the choice, I would choose to live a well-off life. And, who knows, maybe at that point, I wouldn't care about what other working people have to say, because why does that have to bother me? I'm not them. But if you have a shred of sympathy and you have a bit of empathy for your fellow human beings, you understand not everybody is going to be given that opportunity. The same circumstances that you're growing up in, and the same life that you're living. So making up for that, and making up for the kind of privilege you're born with, not in terms of racial privilege, but wealth privilege, being able to choose to make mistakes, miss bills or whatever, because you have the wealth to do so. Recognize that, there's things you can do, and there's things that you can change. Informing yourself, maybe joining a lobby of our own. I know the Citizens Climate Lobby is a place that's actually kind of hopeful. Kind of hopeful in that regular citizens make up a lobby and try to enact change solely through electoralism and lobbying. I guess maybe that wouldn't mean solely through electoralism, but, citizens using lobbying to our advantage. It's ironic. But, it's hard. I think, though, not that I think, but this is what I've heard other more knowledgeable people say. It's possible to change things if we have class consciousness. We have an awareness that we, as the not ultra-wealthy and, what Karl Marx described as the bourgeoisie, if we recognize that we are all in this together, and that the wealthy will try time and time again to hold on to their wealth, as the pandemic shows, wealthy people trying to accumulate more wealth while people are dying, then, we can enact change. But I guess I'm doing my part by talking about this stuff, and it may come out. Who knows? Maybe when we go back to school and some of my classmates see this, I'm gonna be known as like a communist or something, or like a Karl Marx sympathizer, because of, oh god, okay, this isn't gonna help my case, but American propaganda during the Red Scare and McCarthyism still has its effects today in making people afraid of buzzwords like socialism and communism. But socialism itself and communism itself aren't scary ideals. Authoritarian fascist governments are, who co-opt terms like communism and socialism and possibly twist them around, or make a communist state which doesn't meet the needs of its people. Even though, communist state... Okay, wait. There's more to that. There's more nuance to it than just, communism over capitalism. But, in terms of the way that things are living now, propaganda makes it hard to see other viewpoints as valid. Because when you're constantly told of the commie threat, you don't recognize communism as an ideology as much as, something to be afraid of. Something to not hear out or consider. Because in Star Trek, there's communism. A classless, moneyless society where everyone's needs are met. Seriously? That's what people are afraid of? People are afraid of people not worrying about their jobs because they can go off doing space crap? Come on. Seriously? Communism as an ideology is not scary. And when implemented, and when socialism is implemented, societies prosper. Literacy rates are higher, homelessness rates are lower in socialist countries. You can sustain your population, while respecting nature. Because socialism, interestingly, has this neat property where, actually, the free market, as described by many capitalists, is this all-knowing being that, without fail, will provide for a country, because if people demand something, people will supply it, which on the surface makes sense. But capitalism doesn't create the best things as much as it does create the most profitable things, because in capitalism, the goal isn't meeting the demands of the people as much as it is meeting your profit. And it just so happens that coincides with, partially meeting the demands of your people. But not necessarily. Because think about it. In a socialist country, medicine would be given out, or medicine wouldn't be out there for profit. Insulin wouldn't cost $300 like it does in the United States and capitalist countries, because healthcare is seen as a human right, and the government will make sure to allocate things as necessary. Not, prioritizing people who have wealth, who can buy and, get healthcare, but because it's just the right thing to do, to make sure people aren't dying because they're not getting the life-saving medication they need. So, in capitalism, you have garbage being made, mass-produced, planned obsolescence, so that you can buy things again and create more garbage that pollutes the planet, that creates boom and bust cycles. Because think about it like this. Since capitalism's inception, there is a cycle of every couple decades, or maybe every decade, where there's a bust and a boom. Look at the 2008 housing crisis, the 2010 coronavirus pandemic. Anything before that, I don't actually know anything else because I wasn't alive then. But off the top of my head, great market crash of the 1830s, where that one guy, Martin Van Buren, was blamed for it. It wasn't his fault as much as it was also Andrew Jackson, but also capitalism's fault. Booms and busts aren't once in a lifetimes. They're not, this won't ever happen again. It happens every couple years because people will forget about the last one and think, man, again? How weird. And only when you're old and frail will you realize, hey, maybe this is the fault of the system because we aren't changing anything. And if we aren't changing anything, then things are naturally going to continue going the ways that they have been. So, this boom and bust cycle happens because people flock to what is most profitable. And they mass produce things in that area, out and out, again and again, until there's no need for those things, and everything else is left to rot and waste. Now, under socialism, you would plan for these things. You would, in the USSR, please don't call me a commie for pointing this out. In the USSR, they hand calculated everything they would need, but only accounted for 10,000 units. And in a population well over 1 million people, 10,000 units was not enough. So, but they got well within reach, which is, because they couldn't calculate, far enough to meet the demands of their people, they couldn't. But this doesn't mean that the free market in the United States is now the only solution for meeting the demands of our people. Because now that we have computers, a place like Chile, or it might have been Cuba, someplace in South America, a country can now calculate and meet the demands of its people while sustaining nature, while making sure it's not overreaching its bounds, and actually making sure that things aren't wasted or thrown out or garbage piles don't line our cities. So, even despite embargoes and, blockades, a socialist government can still, with moderate effectiveness, sustain its population, despite being economically pounded down by capitalist governments that want to see it fail, because ideologically, socialist countries are against capitalism. Because they prove that you don't need to give the wealthy super duper ultra wealth, and the government can handle things without being authoritarian, right? Because, are we really free under a free market if the majority of products are owned by a single corporation? If, the majority of eyeglasses are owned by a single corporation? If medicine can only be provided through, your insurers instead of through the government? Can you really say that we are free when people are dying because they don't have wealth? Where is the freedom in that? Oh no, I guess you do get to choose 12 different brands of ketchup. Excuse me, I should have thought about the impact of all this stupid junk that I get to choose and afford. Stupid. We're not free, but we could be free, but we aren't. And this doesn't even scratch the surface of the United States militarism. Yeah, militarism. Something like that. Militarism. Corporations profit off of war. This isn't to, call out. This isn't to degrade somebody's service or, disrespect veterans, of which I'm a part of a family of. But war is objectively, in our modern society, not for defending freedom. If you say that it's for defending freedom, look at the Iraq War. Look at the constant... Look at people who enlisted after 9/11 are now seeing their children go out, fight, and die for the same war they couldn't finish. Not because not because they couldn't protect their freedom, but because it's profitable to keep fighting and keep people buying and keep our government buying corporation weapons and military equipment and private contractors. And if, as you listened prior, our government listens to corporations more so than it does people, it doesn't matter if we're anti-war, as long as it's profitable and as long as we don't do something about corporations making a profit off of war, not a lot will change. So what can you do? You can protest. Protesting is pretty effective a lot of the time. You can agitate corporations. while violence is one way to agitate, it's not the only way. Protesting is still a way of going about it. But if you were violent, it happens. I'm pissed too. It's easy to be angry about capitalism and corporations. So, who knows? Who knows? Maybe in a pipe dream, our country will actually develop class consciousness and we'll all collectively be angry enough to start rioting and actually see fruitful change happen. Because prior to that, a lot of more knowledgeable people than me have pointed out that, prior to 2020, it seemed like revolution through riots was not actually going to work. Like, people are so staunchly against rioting and violence, and it's seen as looting and barbaric, even though it's pretty effective at getting the upper class to realize, hey, maybe this will affect our bottom line and our profits, therefore we should do something. It seemed pretty unlikely because not enough people would collectively agree on it. But now, after 2020, other people seem to say that, hey, there's a lot more people being agitating, and that might actually lead to something fruitful. So, if enough people watch videos like this, discrediting capitalism, not promoting violence, please don't ban me from the platform, YouTube, I'm not promoting violence. But if enough people do agitate corporations, then, there's a likelihood that some stuff will change. Happily. But, about militarism. Private contractors can get away with more to destabilize countries than our government could. Because it's no secret that the CIA has toppled governments before. Fidel Castro, I think, maybe that's not his name, someplace in Cuba. The CIA tries overthrowing Fidel Castro, tries, killing socialist democratically elected socialist leaders because they contradict capitalism. It's no secret. Our government does that to foreign countries. Our government does that to the Middle East, to Palestine, to help Israel, whatever. And, it happens, but, there's controversy along with it. So therefore, if our government can't do it, hire it off to private contractors to torture people, to overthrow governments, to create artificial astroturf movements to rebel and throw a coup to once again overthrow governments. But 42 minutes might be enough. I'm feeling pretty tired and my voice is starting to hurt. So I hope you have enough. I hope you have a wonderful week and I hope you enjoyed. And goodbye.